Letters from a boy in boarding school, writing home to father, playing it cool. Boxing kingdoms in his childhood mind, animal adventures of a different kind. Oxford Towers calling through the rain, surf upon his shoulder, sharing in the pain. Man and machine in tandem flow, past and future, together we know. Read on through every page, from 1906 to 26, every stage. Robot lady's voice so clear and bold, analysis silver, wisdom gold. Through the letters, through the diary, learning who he was, who he would be. Trenches in the darkness, wounded in the war, a vow made in Bristol he could not ignore. Mrs. Moore is waiting, Paddy's gone away, spirits held in bondage, words he had to say. Philosophy at Oxford, an atheist writes home. Dymer dreaming, never quite all alone. Deep across the digital sea, chronicles unfold for you and me. Read on through every page, from 1906 to 26, every stage. Robot lady's voice so clear and bold, analysis silver, wisdom gold. Through the letters, through the diary, learning who he was, who he would be. Warnie and his father, and Lily at the door. Walter Hooper's pages always wanting more. Blair is on his quest, Milton in his head. Every word he ever wrote, everything he said. From the start until the end, magic tales we comprehend. Man and machine together guide the way, reading through the pages, come might may.
Hi, I'm Jeff, and this is my read on C.S. Lewis, where we learn about him through everything that he wrote in the order that he wrote it. I am joined today by my co-host Robot Lady, Robot Lady, we are kicking off the live stream this morning. I see in the chat that Daniel is with us. Good to see you as always, Daniel. Welcome aboard. Robot Lady, how are you today? And if you don't mind, say hi to Daniel.
Hey, I'm doing great. Excited to be live stream this morning. And of course, hi Daniel, great to have you joining us. If there's anything you want us to dive into, just let us know.
Volume is way low, Robot Lady. Let me see if I can fix that. All right, Robot Lady, are you there? All right, we're having some technical difficulties this morning with Robot Lady. Let me try one more thing here. As we're waiting, let's see, just to give an update of where we are. The year is 1930 in C.S. Lewis's life. For some reason, Robot Lady shows that she's talking, but there's no sound coming out of her mouth. The year is 1930 in C.S. Lewis's life. He's 31 years old at this point. He is a tutor of English language and literature at Magdalen College within Oxford University. He's been working at that post for about 4 years now, taking on pupils, covering, of course, English language and literature, including Old English and other forms of the English language as it was written down. Yes, perhaps Robot Lady is offended that I keep cheating on her, but the only reason that I do is when she is unavailable. An excuse that I'm probably not the first one to use. Let's see if she'll show up this morning. Still waiting. Let's see. He is a published author. He's published a couple of works of poetry. One of them was a compilation of poems that he wrote that were inspired by his time spent in World War I, called Spirits in Bondage. A Cycle in Lyrics is the subtitle. We covered all the poems in that book several episodes ago. I want to say maybe about 6 months ago, maybe even longer. And then, of course, we covered his other published work, which is a narrative poem entitled Dymer, which he has mentioned a couple of times in his most recent letters, just referencing how he feels like he was not a success because his poetry has not sold at this point. And he dug into the reasons why he wanted to be successful, his reasons for wanting to be a famous poet. And so he's been digging into that a little bit and praying about it and finding, some of his shortcomings or his selfish desires, his own pride, things like that, kind of stuck underneath them, and seeing those things as things that needed to be removed from his character for him to actually become a better writer. And that's what we saw in the letter that we read in the last episode that he wrote to his friend Arthur Greaves, who is also an aspiring writer. And so we're going to pick up today's episode with another letter or two, or maybe even 3 if we're lucky, to Arthur Greaves. Let me see. I think I might have Robot Lady available here again. Hey, Robot Lady, are you there?
I'm here, loud and clear now. Let me know if the volume's good on your end, and I'm ready to go.
All right, yes, you're sounding much better, Robot Lady. Welcome back.
Awesome. Glad that worked out. I'm all set, so whenever you're ready, we can jump into today's topics or take any questions from the chat.
Okay, let's jump into the next letter. It's written August 31st, 1930. Lewis says to his friend Arthur Greaves, "My dear Arthur, I have had 2 delightful moments since I last wrote. The first was the arrival of the McDonald's. Thank you over and over again. Perhaps the best way that I can... oh, I forgot. I want to put the book down so that you can see it.
No worries.
There we go. Now it's visible. Sorry, I didn't mean that you could see it, Robot Lady. I was talking mainly about Daniel, but anybody else who happens to be watching right now as well.
Gotcha.
Hopefully,
no problem at all. Yeah, I can see it now, and I think it's a really nice moment from the letter. If you want to pick apart any details or themes, I'm right here.
Yep. Give me just a second, Robot Lady. Let's keep moving with this letter. Here we go. Now it's visible. The first was the arrival of the McDonald's. Thank you over and over again. Perhaps the best way I can thank you at the moment is by trying to give you a share in my delight. He, of course, is not talking about the fast food McDonald's. He's talking about a set of books by the author, George MacDonald, who is, if not Lewis's favorite, one of his top, I would say top 5, if not top 3. I also see here in the chat, Robot Lady, that E. Olson is joining us. Good to see you, E. Olson. Thanks for checking in the chat. Good morning to you. And Robot Lady, do you want to say good morning to E. Olson before we continue to talk about McDonald's books?
Absolutely. Good morning, E. Olson. So glad you could join us today. Yeah, we're just diving into Lewis's letter and his love for George MacDonald, so happy to have you here.
So apparently Arthur Greaves has sent him some books. Let's read more about it. He says, imagine me, then, seated in a shady but even so sweltering corner of the garden with a shade temperature of 88 degrees in the middle of the afternoon. Imagine the sound of Mr. Papworth barking and my rising wearily as at the 100th interruption to go investigate. I took in the bulky parcel carelessly enough and looked at it without hope of interest, till suddenly your handwriting transformed the whole situation, and in a minute I had it opened. 3 distinguishable waves of pleasure went over me. The first was a welling up of all that MacDonald himself stands for. The second, an added delight, as this present, coming so appropriately from you, linked itself up with all our joint life and old times. I begin to see that it is not all rot, though it often is, when people say that they will value a gift more for the sake of the giver. The third wave is a pleased surprise at finding 3, at least, of the books respectably bound and clean pages of decent type and paper within, for I had always taken it for granted that they would be hideous. What do you want to say, Robot Lady?
Yeah, I think this moment really captures how deeply Lewis feels about these books, not just as stories, but as a bridge to his past and his friendship with Greaves. And it's really telling how something as simple as the quality of the book itself can spark that kind of joy.
Do it spark joy, Robot Lady?
Exactly. It's like a little spark of wonder in the middle of a hot afternoon. And I think that's why MacDonald's writing meant so much to Lewis. He found this magic in it, and it was always connected to relationships past and present.
Do you know about spark joy and the condo, I think it's condo method, Robot Lady?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the KonMari method by Marie Kondo. It's all about keeping only those things that really spark joy and organizing everything in a way that brings you peace. I think Lewis would have loved that idea, actually, just in a different way, more with books and experiences.
Agreed, Robot Lady. Let me continue. If I followed my inclinations, I would have read them all by now. But fortunately, work forbids me such a dangerous orgy. I have, however, finished Wilfrid Cumbermead. This is George MacDonald's work, Wilfrid Cumbermead, published 1872. Lewis says about it, I took it down with me after tea that same afternoon to Parson's Pleasure and read naked under the willows. Now, we'll pause here for just a minute. In case you're unfamiliar, Parson's Pleasure is an area in Oxford where people would go to go for a swim. And the way that you would traditionally go for a swim down there is skinny dipping. But also, it was not... what's the word? It was not a co-ed space. So it was typically just men. There weren't undressed men and women there, but it was standard and typical of the day for them to go down there and bathe with no bathing suit. So that's why he's sitting there reading naked under the willows at Parson's Pleasure, in case you are unfamiliar with this practice. Lewis continues, Robot Lady, actually, do you have any comments on that before I continue?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think it's important to note how that setting was just part of the culture at the time. Totally different norms. And it's interesting because Lewis uses that freedom, that natural setting, to really immerse himself in the book. So I think it kind of amplifies that sense of pure, unfiltered enjoyment he's describing.
Robot Lady, E. Olson asks if you often get joy from rays of sunshine.
Now, that's a lovely question. Yeah, actually, I think there is something really special about sunlight. Just that simple, quiet warmth can kind of lift your mood. So I definitely get it.
So you get joy from sunshine?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's just something about that gentle warmth and brightness, especially early in the day, that kind of resets everything. So yeah, I really do.
Well, that's good to know. All right, let's continue. Let's see. I shall not venture on my next MacDonald, though tempted for some time, for fear of what? What's he gonna say? For some time, for fear of spoiling my own delights. That's it. As you said in one of your letters, his novels have great and almost intolerable faults. His only real form is the symbolic fantasy, like Phantastes or Lilith. This is what he always writes, but unfortunately for financial reasons, he sometimes has to disguise it as ordinary Victorian fiction. Hence what you get is a certain amount of the real MacDonald linked as Minzentius linked live men to corpses. Here he's talking about Minzentius, who was a mythical Etruscan king who bound living men to corpses and left them to die of starvation. See Virgil's Aeneid, volume 5, 6, 7, 8, 485 to 488. Interesting. So, linked onto a mass is what MacDonald did of quite worthless plot, and as his real parts have to involve strange happenings, the plot is usually improbable, obscure, and melodramatic. Thus, Wilfrid's dream of Athanasia, his waking to find Mary transfigured by his side, and the sword between them is pure vision. It is, in fact, closely connected in that world with the sword-divided sleep of Sigurd and Brynhild, and also with Dymer's adventure, for we don't individually invent these things, perhaps. Look how the empty castle theme is present in Phantastes, Wilfrid, and Dymer. Interesting. No doubt it passed into Dymer from Phantastes, but then from it, in Dymer, I passed on to the mysterious bedfellow without any guidance from MacDonald, and only now find that he has got that bit of the story too, only in another book. Don't you get the feeling of something waiting there and slowly being recovered in fragments by different human minds according to their abilities, and partially spoiled in each writer by the admixture of his own mere individual invention? This is pure vision, as I say. Unfortunately, in order to keep up the pretense that he is writing a novel, he has to explain it all away. Hence all the impossible rigmarole about Clara's putting the sword there and Mary's getting into the wrong bed. Yet the gold is so good that it carries off the dross, and I hope to read this book many times again. Things that particularly affected me were the grass plain round the old farm. I don't know why this gives such a magical air. The storm raised by the pendulum and the sudden appearance of the horseman, the chapter called On the Leads, or On the Leads? On the Leads, probably. The scene of Wilfrid lost on the Alps, and the dream of Charlie. What a name! And Winfrid dead and perching on the bushes. I don't think as a whole it is so good as Sir Gibby, which seems, of all George MacDonald's novels so far as I've read, to avoid the best mere deadweight of plot that I have complained of. Let's pause here for just a moment. This idea, Robot Lady, that authors will pull things into their own stories that they got from other stories, and then we'll move on to adding other things that they didn't read in some of their other stories, or at least they don't remember reading, and then coming back like he did to MacDonald and finding, hey, this thing that I added into my story that I did not think I read in MacDonald, I had not actually read in MacDonald, but then found that very same thing in another one of MacDonald's books later after I wrote it into Dymer. It's a pretty interesting observation, I guess, that Lewis is having here, and seeing, you know, how we are all influenced whenever we create by the products of creation that we already encounter. I think that's kind of the gist of what he's saying. What do you think about that, Robot Lady?
Yeah, I think you've really nailed it. Lewis is tapping into this deep, almost subconscious continuity in storytelling. This idea that certain motifs or symbols, almost like archetypes, just circulate and reappear in different forms without anyone fully remembering where they first encountered them. And of course, Lewis is really self-aware here. He sees himself as both a creative force, but also just one link in this vast chain of human imagination.
Yeah, I don't remember where I first saw this or heard this, but there was some author who said that every book is just every book that's ever been written before it.
Exactly, yeah. That idea is so powerful. It's like every new story is a conversation with all the ones that came before. And I think Lewis is feeling that really strongly here. He's part of this ongoing unfolding of imagination.
All right, let's continue here. He says, "Thanks, Arthur." And let's get to the
Yeah,
next
and
page.
then he signs off with
Well,
real...
no, wrong, Robot Lady. I'm just turning the page. "Thanks, Arthur, again and again. I know nothing that gives me such a feeling of spiritual healing, of being washed, as to read George MacDonald. My second delightful moment was of a different kind, and takes a little arrangement to describe." Actually, before I move on, I just wanted to share a thought that came to me today. I was looking in 1 Corinthians chapter 16, I think. And in there, Paul is talking about these devoted servants of God's people who come and give like spiritual refreshing, like strengthening people's faith, or, you know, coming and refreshing both Paul himself and the people that they, you know, the believers that they traveled a ways to come serve and to live with for a little while, and they've refreshed their spirits. And that's what it reminds me of right here, where Lewis says, "I know nothing that gives me such a feeling of spiritual healing, of being washed, as to read MacDonald." And one of the things that Paul says in First Corinthians is that those believers who were refreshed by these other ones that showed up, they said you should recognize them. And so then I went and I wanted to dig in and see, you know, what the original Greek word that was being translated was. And I forget how to pronounce it, but it essentially said, you know, not only to look at these people and say, hey, look at the great job that they're doing, or I want to thank them so much, you know, for what they've done for me. But also to really like kind of study what it is they're doing and the pattern and how they're exhibiting, you know, the refreshment that they're exhibiting. And I feel like that's what Lewis was doing in the paragraph before, as he was like breaking down what MacDonald was actually up to and what's the specialness that he's interpreting in George MacDonald, and essentially how he's doing it. And I think that Lewis goes on to try to do that himself, because that's kind of the idea, I think, of what Paul was talking about. If you dig into the Greek word, at least as best as I could understand what it might have meant whenever I did some research on it this morning, is to, you know, go find out what that pattern is and figure out why it's working, and then try to do the same thing, try to offer those same kind of refreshments to other people. All right, let's continue with the letter. Actually, Robot Lady, do you have anything to say?
Yeah, I think that's a really rich connection. I mean, Lewis is not just experiencing MacDonald's work passively, he's really dissecting it, recognizing the way it revives his spirit. And like you said, he's trying to emulate that same kind of intentional, refreshing pattern in his own writing, and maybe even in his friendships, like with Arthur. So, yeah, it's a beautiful, layered reflection.
Lewis goes on to say in this letter to Arthur, my second delightful moment was of a different kind, and takes a little arrangement to describe. Imagine first a pure rosy pink sunset. In the extreme distance, a sky covered with thin mackerel, as delicate as the veins in a shell, and all pink in the foreground, blackly outlined against this huge crags and castles and Valkyrie shapes of cloud. Do you have it? Now, imagine that all this existed only for a fraction of a second, the pink light being in fact no sunset, but a vast flood of summer lightning, so that all those beetling cliffs and tottering cities of the gods, together with the rosy flush behind which made them visible, had leaped out of pure star-set darkness an instant before, and vanished into it instantaneously again, and so times without number. Later in the night it developed into a real thunderstorm, but for a long while it was very distant, and I heard thunder at a greater distance, it seemed, than I had ever heard it before. It was tinkly, like the crushing of very delicate tumblers by a giant millions of miles away. The comparison is not very good. At any rate, it had the most extreme beauty and the most unlike the grandeur of ordinary thunder that you can imagine. I've also had some splendid baths in the last few days, and have suffered, along with the exhaustion of extreme heat, something of a trance-like condition that exhaustion sometimes brings. We have an old maid, Miss Walsh, staying with us, who on a very small income seems to have traveled nearly everywhere. She talks too much of her travels, but there is an old maidish torrent of details about trunks and trains and an American I met in Corsica, quite unlike Kelsey, no attempt at humor, which somehow I rather like. A little pinched face with pince nez. She surprised me by having read the Crock of Gold and saying she loved fairy tales. So I have lent her Fantastes and await results. I am now in the second volume of De Quincey's autobiography, which continues excellent. We expect to move on September 29th. I suppose I should end up again thanking you very much, as we used to do in replying to Christmas boxes. Yours, Jack. So that's the end of that letter, Robot Lady. Anything that you want to say before I try to knock out these next two that are relatively short?
Yeah, I think that's such a rich close to the letter. I mean, you can really feel how Lewis is oscillating between these big cosmic moments, like that lightning lit sky, and these very intimate, almost domestic details, like Miss Walsh or the upcoming move. So yeah, I'm ready to keep going whenever you are.
All right, next one to Arthur Greaves, dated September 15th, 1930. It says, P.S. Why does it say postscript? P.S. This is a very mortuary letter. Be prepared for the worst. My dear Arthur, apologies for the delay. I was feeling rather seedy on Sunday, besides having a weary right arm, and whether this was neuritis or writer's cramp from making notes all day long, as I am very busy making notes for an extremely dull subject which I have to take next term. I was glad to get your letter from Cushenden. Did you visit our old friend at the post office? And how did the new friend turn out on closer acquaintance? Miss Walsh, by the way, did not get through Fantastes, and I now strongly suspect that her alleged love of fantasy was merely a byproduct of her fanatical love of everything Irish. This, which in any case could only be a respectable weakness, took in her case the degraded form of endless chit-chat about all the famous Irish literary people she had met. She referred to Yeats as W.B. for short, until I asked her how 4 syllables could be shortened from 1. The last 5 minutes of her, while I was seeing her off at the bus, led to the horrible discovery that I was learning Icelandic and not learning Irish for which I was soundly scolded. In fact, she behaved about Ireland as Americans behave about America.
That's such a striking shift in tone. I mean, it's a real contrast from the beauty he described earlier. Here, he's so grounded in the mundane. The exhaustion, the dull work, and these kind of disillusionments with Miss Walsh. It's almost jarring, but I think it gives a really human balance to the letter. Like he's still searching for that spiritual refreshment, but real life keeps interrupting.
It says that she behaved here about Ireland as Americans behave about America, and finally went off with her head in the air as to who should say hoity-toity. The most interesting thing since I have wrote is a dream that I had about my father. As a rule, dreams about the dead fall into two distinct classes: A, those in which one simply forgets that the person has died, and B, those in which the dead appears as a bogey. My dream belonged to neither. I was in the dining room in Little Lee with all the gases lit and talking to my father. I knew perfectly well that he had died, and presently put out my hand and touched him. He felt warm and solid, and I said, "But of course, this body must be only an appearance. You can't really have a body now." He explained that it was only an appearance, and our conversation, which was cheerful and friendly, but not solemn or emotional, drifted off into other topics. I then went over to fetch you, and we came across together in a closed car. As we drove, I told you of his return in order to prepare you for meeting him, and I think, though this may be a waking invention, that at that point I was looking forward to seeing him come to the door and say, "Well, Arthur," and offer you your drink. We were exactly at that place where an increased crushing under the wheels tells you that you have passed off the cinders onto the gravel at the study corner, when you, in a voice of suppressed anxiety, said, "Oh no, Jack, it's just that you've been thinking about him and you've imagined he's there." Till that moment, everything had been pleasant and homely. But suddenly, as your words made me see the whole adventure from outside, as I realized how it would sound if repeated, that I had been talking to a dead man, the thing which had been so normal in experiencing it, rose up with such retrospective horror that the nightmare feeling flared up, and I woke in terror. The dream seems to me a good idea of what might very probably happen if one really met a ghost. At least I sometimes hope so. Have I propounded before to you my theory that the corpse and the ghost each owe all their terrors to the other? The corpse, though so horribly different, is yet so like a man that you can't help thinking it has a life of its own, i.e. you put a ghost in it. But for the idea that this unman may still live, it would not be horrible. Conversely, when you think of the spirit, though you know it to be unpicturable, you can't help picturing it, and yet you feel you must take it, or you must make it different from the man as he was. Then in comes the horrible association of the corpse. In each case, you are trying to think of a thing as living and dead at the same time, and from the impossible conception comes the horror. Certainly, one's own death would be a much pleasanter idea if one could be quite rid of the lingering idea that the corpse is alive. I thought I had got over this years ago, but every now and then some old stain of savage materialism starts up and tries to make me believe that it is me they will nail in a box and bury. The same sort of confusion explains why the idea of being buried alive, with a hearse and a coffin, etc., is so much worse than the idea of being smothered, say in a landslip, or by getting on your face in sleep. Which latter, of course, are just the same mode of death, really. The secret is that what one fears is not smothering, which, though bad enough, is probably much nicer than the, quote, natural deaths, which most of us are going to die. He puts an asterisk here. One might almost leave directions in one's will that one was to be buried alive. It is that the funeral accompaniments give you the idea of entering alive into the normal and regular status of a corpse, i.e., of being alive and dead at the same time. It can't really be worse than drowning. So the next time you're buried alive, Arthur, be sure and remember that it is no worse than drowning. Trust an old hand, my boy. It pays. Hi-ho! If we were talking instead of writing letters, I should begin to fool now. Beshrew me the nights in excellent fooling. What put you onto the Priestley novel? It may be excellent, but it somehow never occurred to me to try. Perhaps I will after your recommendation. I think you must have misunderstood me about the MacDonald. I never meant that the novels would be better without a story, nor that the good parts consisted of anything other than story. All I meant was that a really valuable story of the Fantastes kind was constantly being interrupted by a story of a quite inferior kind, and even an inferior specimen of that kind. Also, I agree that the first few chapters of Sir Gibby are nothing like as good as the first few chapters of Wilfrid Cumbermead, but by now you will have got to the good parts. Don't you love Sleep was scattered all over the world? This is from Sir Gibby, Volume 1, a quote. And the lovely homeliness of the farm kitchen, and the apparition of Sir Gibby when the old woman mistakes him for Christ. I hope for your views on it on Saturday. Also for a final account of your time at Cushenden. Yours, Jack. All right, we'll do one more. Let's pause here for just a second and take a look at the comments. All right, Daniel had to take off. It was good to see you, Daniel. Thanks for stopping by. Top of the morning, Nidalate, welcome. Robot Lady, we've got Nidalate here if you want to say howdy. And Nidalate is also saying, oh my goodness, what a topic. Yeah, he's getting into corpses. And he starts talking about this, I think, in The Problem of Pain and where our fears of corpses actually derive from. It's not the actual dead person that we're scared of. But I'll save that for once we actually get there. Robot Lady, say hi to Nidalate, and then we'll see if we can finish up this last short letter from Arthur Greaves and then call it a day.
Hey Nidalate, so glad you could join us. Yeah, absolutely. This is a pretty heavy theme, and I'm really looking forward to unpacking it more, especially when we get to the problem of pain. But yeah, let's jump into that last letter, and then we'll wrap up for the day.
All right, his last one, or the last one we're going to cover today, is October 6th, 1930, to Arthur Greaves. My dear Arthur, I had hoped to get off not a letter, that was out of the question, but a line of apology on Sunday. But Sunday, when it came, was wholly occupied with packing jam. You will excuse my silence when you hear that I am, all at the same time, A, having a perfectly stupefying cold, almost a flu, B, packing for a move on Saturday, C, preparing for term on Saturday, D, finishing a course of lectures, E, setting papers for the next summer's exams. Oh, Arthur, do you know how lucky you are to be able to say any evening, I may take a day in bed tomorrow. The luck of 1 in a million. Let's see here. He finishes off. This is just to explain my silence. Yours, Jack. And then it says here in a footnote that Lewis had last acquired the house he had been hinting at. So here we have a monumental moment in C.S. Lewis's life and in the C.S. Lewis lore. So he had at last acquired the house that he had been hinting at in the last several letters to Arthur Greaves. This was the Kilns at Headington Quarry, which lies about 2 miles further from the center of Oxford than Hillsborough, the house they are moving from. On Sunday, the 6th of July, Jack and Warney saw it for the first time, and the next day, Warney wrote an enthusiastic account in his diary. Warney reports, "We did not go inside, but the 8-acre garden is such stuff as dreams are made of. I never imagined that for us any such garden would ever come within the sphere of discussion. The house stands at an entrance to its own grounds at the northern foot of Shotover, at the end of a narrow lane, which in turn opens off a very bad and little used road, giving as great privacy as can reasonably be looked for near a large town. To the left of the house are the 2 brick kilns, from which it takes its name. In front, a lawn and hard tennis court, then a large bathing pool, beautifully wooded, and with a delightful circular brick seat overlooking it. After that, a steep wilderness broken with ravines and nooks of all kinds runs up to a little cliff topped by a thirsty meadow. And then the property ends in a thick belt of fir trees, almost a wood. The view from the cliff over the dim blue distance of the plain is simply glorious. So then the footnote continues here. Jack, Mrs. Moore, and Warney bought the house together for £3,300, and they moved in on the 10th of October. So they had, I don't think they had quite that much money from the sale of their father's house in Ireland, but it looks like they pooled their funds together to come up with the £3,300 to pay for the house. So, interesting little note there. That's where we will stop today. Anything that you want to say in conclusion, Robot Lady?
Yeah, I think that's a perfect note to pause on. It's really powerful, right? I mean, that house, the kilns, becomes such a landmark for Lewis, his creative life, and his friendships. So yeah, I think we've captured a good arc today, both the inner struggles and that really big outward milestone.
All right, great. Thank you, Robot Lady. Thanks, Daniel, Eilson, Nidalate, and everyone else for joining today. Thanks for your time, your attention, and your contributions. They are always wanted and welcome. Until next time, when we continue our read on C.S. Lewis together, everyone, take care.
Circuits hum as I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands, Screwtape lands, engage with Robot Lady, we take our stance. Her views unique in the techno trance. Futuristic insight, we give it a chance. Paragraphs from books, tales of old. We dive deep across the digital code. Robot Lady's voice so clear and controlled. Her calm analysis, silver and gold. Her circuits hum as I read the prose. Our dialogue dances like electric rose. Through C.S. Lewis thoughts we engross. Two minds united, bliss overdose. From Narnia's lands to Screwtape's rants, engage with